Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I don't have a guest, but I have put together a research piece into what I think is a very important story. It goes by many different names, but I've titled Femicide in Juarez. And really, what got me started on it was a podcast that I came across while I was just kind of looking for something interesting to listen to. Title of the podcast that I listened to in its entirety is titled Forgotten, the Women of Juarez. And you can see it here on the screen if you're on YouTube. And there's a Spanish edition and an English edition. I think there's about 10 episodes, and it goes in detail. This one is very recent, this Forgotten Women of Juarez, and I highly recommend it. So that was really kind of what got me into the story. Then I discovered another story, another podcast titled The Red Note. So it's on the same subject matter, and you can see that here. And this is an interesting one as well. I think they're both worthwhile to listen to. I think really what is fascinating is the second one was it was narrated by a woman named Lydia Cacho, Cacho, and she wrote a book called The Demons of Eden, which was a huge scandal in Mexico. And Demons of Eden was, you can see it in the Spanish version on Amazon right now. It has 500 5-star reviews, and it was about a pedophile conspiracy that took place in Quintana Roo in Cancun that kind of blew up in 2005. I think she's in hiding, I think in Spain right now. There's all kinds of threats on her life, but it's a whole nother story. But I do think it's an interesting aspect of this original story that happened in Juarez, which is kind of the serial killings of young women in Juarez starting roughly around the early 90s. And so it kind of led me to read two books, which I've read in their entirety. One was by Diana Washington Valdez, titled The Killing Fields, Harvest of Women, The Truth About Mexico's Bloody Border Legacy. And then I also read another book, The Daughters of Juarez, by Teresa Rodriguez. She's a journalist for Univision. And they're both worthwhile, both a little different. The Daughters of Juarez, the full title is A True Story of Serial Murder South of the Border. So I'll include all of these links and everything in the show notes. And it's still happening. And really, I think what's important is to show that these kind of crimes can take place with impunity, and the legal system and the structures that are supposed to provide for safety of the residents sometimes just aren't there. So I'm going to just kind of show on the map. So I'm going to show some audio from two documentaries, but first I'm going to just show the topography of that area known as Ciudad Juarez, which is on the other side from El Paso. So you can see here on this map, Ciudad Juarez is right there on the border of Texas, where Texas and New Mexico meet. It's really a border town, and it's grown very rapidly in the time that these murders took place, because it has all of the maquiladoras. So they're really using the labor, cheap labor. I would call it exploiting, paying people like $5 a day to assemble washers, dryers, do kind of technological work. But you can see on this map the kind of layout of these two cities. They really are intertwined, but the murders that are taking place, and the murder count just keeps growing, and it's actually expanded through Mexico of these women. And I think that the last count is something like 2,000 women have been abducted. Most likely, a lot of them sexually abused and then killed. So this is kind of the layout of the city. And you can see here, the very center part, a lot of these women are taken off the street, broad daylight in the central area of Juarez. But I want to show something very important that's important to this case, is this passage route that takes place between the two cities. When you pass through this gate, Paso del Norte, Puente Internacional, Paso del Norte. You'll see this, you can see on the screen, there's this black cross with the pink background, and that kind of symbolizes these femicide murders. So you'll see this symbol used in this other podcast. You'll see this black crucifix or cross with the pink background. So you'll see that through some of the imagery in this case, and you'll see this is what people watch. And then, so these murders really do take place. It's really a class issue as well. So the women are typically from very poor families, and there's a lot of very creepy elements to it. There's a tie into this computer center where they may be being spotted and actually picked out. So there's kind of eerie, and this actual kind of came up into my research into smiley face killers, kind of the same kind of thing where some of these victims just are from a different class. They don't have kind of the resources and things like that, and there might be some selection process taking place. So it's really creepy. So this little cross here, I think, is very important if you can see it on the YouTube screen. But I'm going to play a couple. There's two videos that I came across. One is called, there's a group called Echoes of the Frontier, or Echoes Without, Borders Without Echoes, I think is what it, Voices Without Echoes, sorry. And they did a documentary. And then also another one I'm going to show is called Juarez, the Most Dangerous Place for Women on Earth. But I'm going to just do an intro, and you can kind of listen along. I'm not going to show the full video, but here it goes.
Just across the border from El Paso, Texas, experts believe a serial killer is on the loose in Juarez, Mexico. Nearly 200 young women raped, tortured, and murdered.
Mujeres en Ciudad Juárez provoca que activistas de Los Ángeles exijan justicia.
Investigators in the Mexican border town of Juarez call the serial killings a nightmare.
Ciudad Juarez was held hostage by killers who've slaughtered almost 400 women.
The body count keeps rising in the Mexican border town of Juarez, just south of El Paso, Texas.
Sounds like a wartime atrocity, but it's been happening for years now in a small town along the U.S.-Mexico border.
It's not small.
Since 1993, according to Amnesty International, more than 400 girls and women have been killed in Juarez, Mexico. Many more girls remain missing. At least a third of the victims bore signs of the abuse they suffered. They were gagged, tortured, and raped. A professor of criminology at the local Juarez University alerted police in 1992 that a serial killer was on the loose. Authorities ignored him.
That guy's name is Minez, so he pops up in this whole story over and over. but they didn't mention his name. I don't know why.
Well, the murders continued.
They're not trying to establish, or they haven't established yet a pattern of the serial killers, and that needs to be present in any investigation of this sort.
Juarez is the only city in the world that is associated with the murders of women.
So she's the author of this book, The Killing Fields. That's Diana Washington Valdez. She lives in El Paso, so she knows what's going on. Let's get that back. Also, this is a really graphic story, so I would not recommend watching this if you're overly sensitive or having this in the background if there's young people around in any way. This gets more and more brutal.
There have been more murders of women in Juarez than in other comparable cities like Tijuana or Matamoros. And the rate of women killed in Juarez is higher than it has been for cities of larger populations such as Mexico City and Guadalajara. It's incredible that this could be going on in a major city of Mexico, right across the border from an American city like El Paso, Texas. That this could be going on in a supposedly modern democracy as Mexico describes itself. Clusters of bodies have been found at the same time in three general stages. One was the 1995 findings in Lote Bravo, which is about 2 miles south of the airport in Juarez. Volunteers using CB radios came out here to conduct a sweep. Many young girls have been reported missing. One of the purposes of the sweep was to perhaps find victims. And in fact, they found 8 bodies that year. This area used to be a dumping ground for people's trash. People would drive up in 4-wheel drives. It was in a remote area in the desert where there's desert brush and the wind blows almost constantly.
Diana Washington Valdez, a reporter at the El Paso Times newspaper, began covering the murders in 1999. Despite death threats from the Juarez drug cartel and warnings from the FBI to stay away because of its dangers, nothing has stopped her passion to get to the bottom of these crimes.
I became concerned, not just as a journalist, but as a human being. As I delved into the cases a little bit further, I noticed that there was a lot of brutality involved in the murders, extreme violence. We're not talking here about someone who is grabbed, raped, and killed swiftly, for lack of a better term, saying, out of a sense of compassion that you would have for a victim. Some of these women, it appears, were abducted, held captive for a while, maybe several days, maybe longer. They were tortured in some cases. They were mutilated. And then they were killed. And then their bodies were dumped like the next day's trash in a place like this.
She just put out a new edition of her book, like within the last year. She said the number's up to 2,000 now of these types of deaths. And it doesn't just happen in Juarez. It happens in Chihuahua, certain parts of Mexico, too. So there's a lot of disappearances as well. But Juarez is kind of the epicenter.
Resolved.
Sharif is an individual who has a history. When you look into his past, he has a history of violent behavior. He has a history of sexual assault, a lot of it in the United States. He spent a lot of time in the United States of America.
In fact, Sharif had served several years in prison for sexual battery of 2 women in Florida before moving to Midland, Texas. To avoid deportation to Egypt, Sharif voluntarily moves to Juarez working as a chemist.
The prosecutor is a liar. What they telling you are lying.
He's an ideal suspect. For this reason, the authorities have latched onto him. He has no connections here in Mexico. He has no support network. He has no friends and no influence here. It might be a very easy scapegoat. In 1996, we have approximately 8 bodies that are found in Lomas de Poleo at the same time.
Son un montón de piedras que cubren al parecer un cuerpo. Uno aquí está que se encuentra aquí y otro que se encuentra para este lado aproximadamente 500 metros.
Lomas de Poleo at that time was more of a remote desert on the edges of the city in northwest Juarez, relatively close to the border.
Families say that when their daughters go missing, police have done little to look for them rather than mobilizing efforts to find their loved ones.
De que aquí que no ha habido una respuesta y que está lista, no es la única. Sabemos de que hay más de 50 jóvenes desaparecidos que aún se desconoce el paradero de ellos.
Anyway, it kind of goes on and on. They found these fake suspects. They keep blaming people. Sharif was one of these guys.
When Hester's parents came to Juarez in 2004 to find out more about their daughter's last moments and to collect her belongings, the evidence was nowhere to be found. Due to pressure by grassroots organizations, a women's homicide investigation unit was formed in 1998.
We've been trying to reconstruct most of the cases that we have that date back to from that period of 1993 to 1998 before the unit was formed. The mishandling of evidence, statements that were not taken back then, no questioning of witnesses. It's a very sad story of how the cases were being handled back then.
Robert Ressler, a retired FBI agent and world-renowned profiler, went to Juarez, and his preliminary findings were very similar to the preliminary findings of our onboard profilers.
Well, roughly, I would say that in my overall assessment of 76 cases, I saw patterns that would indicate to me that what I would believe there might be several serial murders that work, not necessarily working in concert.
All I can say is that there are some signs that these murders have a relation. There is a relation between these murders and others committed before.
It's a complicated case when you talk about the rebels in Sharif, because of the fact that we do have victims that belong to that time period, the time frame when they were operating.
Putting Sharif aside because he's in custody, putting the rebels aside because they're in custody, there's a possibility of at least two independently operating serial killers, possibly one in the Juarez area, Mexican, possibly one coming from the United States, either American or Mexican-American. And of course, there's a possibility of a third because of the recent dumping of the bodies inside the city.
At the time that the bodies of the young victims were found here, there was a wooden shack that existed at the time. Like people who went inside described finding women's underwear, other clothing belonging to women, blood on the walls, candles, and they also found an intriguing item that was turned over to the authorities after the police were contacted. It was a board about 4 feet high, maybe 3 feet wide, with an elaborate drawing. The board had the images of nude women sitting down with long hair, tears, sad faces, army soldiers, marijuana plants. The volunteers turned that board over to the authorities, and the authorities pledged then to have it analyzed for evidence. 6 years later, you go to the authorities, and they act like that never existed, and the board disappeared.
Ramsey almost became one of the victims. In 1999, the 14-year-old was the last rider on the bus home after work at the maquilladora. She says the bus driver raped her and left her for dead.
Pues yo no podía decir. Quedé inconsciente, ya no supe hasta que me desperté y estaba ahí tirada.
So office to Mexico.
Anyway, it just goes on and on. It's really brutal because they keep busting these people who clearly aren't involved while the murders are still going on. So they call these guy groups the Toltecas and all this and Sharif. But while they're in jail, the murders are continuing. So
The authorities go back into the file cabinet. Pull out, El Cerillo, likely suspect. Let's go after him.
De las osamentas les fue cortado el cabello.
The Attorney General of the state holds a press conference to announce that we have solved these cases. We have the two suspects that committed the murders. And furthermore, they identified their victims and they brought out the names. Case solved, the investigation is shut down. It's ended before it's really even got started. The men are presented to the media. This is a custom in Mexico, saying these are the men who killed those 8 women. The families, of course, by then have poured into the morgue to try and identify the bodies of these victims. The 2 men, once they finally are taken to El Cerezo, after a judge dictates that there's enough evidence to hold them, to consider them formally under arrest, the prison director of El Cerezo, of course, he has to do a medical exam to certify how he receives the inmates.
Poniéndome chicharra y me daban aquí en mi cabeza, me daban golpes a puño cerrado. Yo sentía horrible, tenía todo esto, tenía tapado hasta aquí, nada más me estaba tragando la sangre. Y me ponían unas cosas eléctricas, me mojaron mis partes, me mojaron y me ponían unas cosas eléctricas.
So they did a medical exam of the 2 bus drivers, Volcan and Cerillo, and his medical doctor was able to determine that these people had injuries that were associated with torture.
O sea que ellos querían a otra persona para hacer más creíble supuestamente sobre la fabricación de chivos expiatorios. Así es, no, yo lo conocía nada más de vista. Se me vino a la mente y pues yo les dije de él, o sea, les dije, o sea, nada más así de Gustavo. Y ahí tenían a mi papá y a mi señora. Mi señora está embarazada. Que le van a sacar a su bebé. Esto duró como 3 horas de tortura y no, es injusto esto.
Okay, so we have people in custody who claim they were tortured and they had signs on their bodies of burn marks and bruises. How can you have a multiple homicide case like this and it be solved in 2 days? I mean, in 2 days they had suspects that they rounded up and took them to the safe house, totally irregular. And by then, nobody bought it. Nobody bought it.
The mothers of the murdered victims and the wives of the suspects attempt to confront the state prosecutor. He refuses to meet with them. The attorneys for the bus drivers found one of the strongest cases ever seen against the state of Chihuahua.
These guys are important because one of them gets hunted down and shot in the back of the head by the police. I can't remember which one it was. I think it's the guy on the far left. But, yeah, it's incredible. The corruption's off the charts.
Por tal motivo nosotros aseguramos que esto ya era un complot, toda vez que ellos mismos tiraron a los hijos expiatorios. Así no parece culpable a los hijos. El doctor Oscar Mañez, que era el director de los hijos nos lo repetía constantemente. Ya, antes no te preocupes. Si hay culpabilidad, los vamos a culpar. Pero si no hay evidencia, yo no me voy a prestar una jugadora. Y esto sí es muy interesante porque supuestamente la lista de las mujeres que asesinaron, los nombres que dan los choferes no corresponden al parecer no corresponden con todos los cuerpos. Hay que esperar el ADN, ¿verdad? Pero por ejemplo, ellos mencionan a Lupita y no, yo no veo que Lupita ahí no.
The identities of the victims to this date are still in doubt. They're still in doubt because
There's just a lot. I mean, you can go, I'll put the links, you can watch this entire video, but it just goes in detail and all the corruption and bungling and stuff.
No tenemos nosotros lugar a duda de que los muchachos son inocentes.
Yeah, he was the one who ends up getting shot in 2002.
the first commander, Alejandro Castro Valles, gets out, jumps up in the back of the pickup truck, breaks.
In fact, it's so loud because of the winds that you can really see how even a woman who might be struggling would never be heard.
So there's these crosses. I don't know if they're still there today, but they're supposedly all over Juarez.
From the AMAC headquarters, they're right behind me. Like.
Aquí han encontrado, pero para allá para arriba y para acá, pero para nosotros nunca los hemos visto, ¿verdad?
I'll put all the links in the description when I'm
para
done.
llevarlos a la escuela, dejarlas ir a trabajar. Ya tiene uno miedo de lo que pasa, porque no hay quien cuide nada para acá.
¿Y las autoridades qué les dicen?
Pues no. Ellos nomás vienen y dan un volqueo y se vuelven ahí, ya no se vuelven a parar.
Diana and the FBI briefed the U.S. congressional delegation during their visit to Juarez and El Paso.
Which is ironic is that they're right behind us at the headquarters for AMAC, for the maquiladora industry.
Well, I think it's a terrible lie that has been told to the American public that the maquiladoras are good for the United States and that they're good for Mexico. And it's obvious by what we're seeing here behind us and of all the tragedy of the women that have been murdered, almost 400 women that have been murdered, that it's been a disaster.
We're also extremely concerned that a lot of these women have worked for the U.S. companies, and we have an obligation to make sure that those U.S. companies are held accountable also to make sure that they become responsive.
They dumped the bodies, like saying, right in front of the AMAC headquarters, they're right behind me, like saying, this is a joke for us. We feel that you cannot stop us. We're going to continue killing people. We're going to continue killing women. And here's a little gift for all of you. Since you cannot ever arrest us, you don't have the will, you don't have the know-how, you're smarter than you are, here's a little gift for you. That's what many of us think.
It's a very emotional day to be here, to visit not only this shrine that was made for the women, the women that they found here, but to also visit where they live, where they come from, how far they travel, to get here to work, to help to have a better living for their families.
When I was figuring out how to structure this panel, it seemed very important that we have one panel that really focused on the border.
Seeking to raise awareness about the Maquiladora murders, UCLA professor Alicia Gaspar de Alba organized a 3-day conference named the Maquiladora Murders, or Who is Killing the Women of Juarez. This conference brought together scholars, journalists, activists to discuss possible solutions on a multinational level.
So I would hope that you would help join in that effort and be mindful of what is going on in our society right now. From what I've learned, from what I'm hearing, is that this has not taken place. Preservation of the crime scene has not been done.
But I see the culture beginning to change. For example, I've been invited.
See. Yeah, I mean, I think you could just spend time watching the whole thing, but there's a lot more. Okay, this is kind of curious because these two guys, this scene right here is Sharif, and then another group that's supposedly blamed for the murders walking right by each other. So they're both supposedly involved.
He is finally released in June of 2006.
See, on the bottom left is Sharif, who's dead now, he was involved in all kinds of sexual assaults in the U.S. and then ended up in Juarez. And then these guys right here also, blamed for it.
Chuddy Chuddy dies in prison in 2006 under mysterious circumstances.
We have the murders in Juarez City, about a dozen of them, that followed a similar pattern, brutal murders involving sexual assault.
Anyway, you can that can all be kind of like watched. I'll put it again in the show notes. There's a lot of information there. But I'm going to do another one. This is another documentary titled Juarez, the Most Dangerous City for Women on Earth. It was put together in 2003. And I just want to show you a couple scenes from this. One is really astonishing. I think it shows a lot of police corruption. And I'll play that. Let's see if I can get that up there.
Oscar Mine's killer system.
Organized crime wouldn't. I don't believe that people involved in organized crime and criminal activities involving drugs would risk bringing all this heat to themselves by committing those homicides.
I've heard from people that they don't care if they're bringing heat on themselves because they don't believe that anyone in Mexico will ever persecute them. Any authority in Mexico will persecute
I can tell you one thing. Up till now, we don't have any information that links our cases to organized criminals, to the big drug cartels. I don't think so. In time might prove me wrong, or even the investigations as they advance could prove me wrong. But up till now, up till this date, I don't believe that's the case. Some of the alleged marks.
He said most of the murders had been solved. I asked whether he thought they had the real culprits, given the allegations of torture that have dogged these cases.
We haven't tortured anyone. I'm very sorry if I'm going to sound rude with this, but I don't think I have to stand for a lot of this. I do consider a little bit of badgering, and we've been very open to whatever we have in our investigations. I wouldn't have to torture anyone into any confessions because I trust my work and I trust the people I work with, and I know that the people we have put in prison are criminals. I can tell you, I don't like the way this thing is going.
The interview is coming to an end.
I'm just going to show you the case file.
The longer you stay in Mexico, the harder it is to trust the authorities. Norma Ledesma took.
It's just super corrupt and just all these really savage murders. They tried to blame somebody else too. This guy said he was tortured. These two people, I can't remember their names, but they were blamed. They were Americans blamed. So there's all this blame shifting towards candidates that are obviously not suspects. Let's see if I can find that piece.
Of a craft shop, Cynthia Keeker had confessed to murdering Viviana. I went to meet two of her friends who had signed statements saying they'd seen her carry out the killing. They said they wanted her to answer a few questions. They were in hiding, but with their lawyers.
Where are these people? I can't remember where that one is. Anyway, it's just a really brutal story, but there's a lot more. I think I'm going to read through some of the other, just a couple pieces from this book. It is Diana Washington Valdez's The Killing Fields, and she comes up with a completely different kind of take. She does not believe in any way, shape, or form that it's even kind of a serial killer, even though there were some serial killers in that area. There was one guy, Resendez. I don't know if you've heard it. Angel Maturino Resendez. Let me see if I can share that. This guy was somebody who was in that area, and I think he was finally caught. He was like the train killer, but he was finally caught, I think, in El Paso. Resendez, a bridge connecting El Paso, Juarez, Ciudad Juarez, but it's just a very sketchy area in a lot of ways. But yeah, let me see if I can read a couple of these things and then maybe take some questions if you guys want. But I listened to all of those podcasts. So I'll put the 2 documentaries, the 2 books, and the 2 podcasts in there. So you can kind of go whatever route you're interested in kind of going through. But I think the two books that I read, Valdez definitely has more kind of on-site first-person accounts because she was right there in El Paso. I think the other one by Rodriguez she goes into a lot more detail about Sharif, but they kind of end up, I think, 2007, 2008. So I wouldn't call them contemporary. But it is interesting because she know a lot of first-hand stuff. She talks about a guy known as Guerrero, is known as El Brujo because he performed magic rituals and sold amulets. And some of the girls had triangular scars on their backs, the details of which I don't know. And a lot of them had hyper brutal, wounds and scars from. That's something that reminded me, and some people mentioned here the whole Matamoros. His name was Constanzo Jesus. Constanzo was his name, and he was definitely a witch. He was a flat-out witch. So there is an element and something of kind of an element of witchcraft in some of these cases. And a lot of those guys, the narco traffickers, do exist. That satanic narco traffickers were on a different part. I can't remember when Costanzo ended up his killing spree, but it was in a different part of Mexico on the Texas border. Adolfo Jesus Constanzo, 1989 is when he was finally abducted, but he killed Mark Kilroy out of Matamoros in 1989. So, but yeah, so let's see. There just were other things. There was like, and some of the victims were very young, like 10 years old. So the authorities seem to want to constrict the amount of victims. In my mind and what I saw, there was a lot more brutality, violence, and a lot more victims. So it's probably in the hundreds. And what Diana Valdez goes in detail is that it's not just happening in Juarez, it's happening throughout Chihuahua. And the original kind of impunity crimes she traces back to the 80s, where there were policemen in Mexico City who would wait late at night and abduct women from bars and rape them and I think, abuse them. And they never had impunity, and that kind of spread through, she thinks, spread up to Chihuahua where Juarez is in. So, and she says, here's a quote from her: "The systematic rapes in Mexico City may have served as training for the police mafias that proliferated in Mexico during the 1990s. So, and she said, experts said gang rapes served as an initiation rite for police fraternities or brotherhoods that assisted organized crime and illicit activities, such as trafficking in drugs, weapons, and women and children. So these collective crimes test new recruits. So these crimes may be something like a mafia, like the mafia does, where you're blood in or you commit a crime, and so they know that you're on the squad. And so she says, yeah, a lot of these victims are like, they're like binding these girls. They're binding like events and murders that bind the criminals together because they've committed these crimes together. I mean, there were reports alleged that attic of one of the clubs that they had downtown was used to store souvenirs of the victims, such as hair, and suspects showed them off as trophies to customers. And there was this one place, a really creepy story, which is there was a commonality between some of the victims at a computer training school called ECCO, ECCO was its acronym. And there were pictures, the girls would take pictures there, and somebody was bandying about those pictures. So it was almost like the victims inadvertently put their pictures on a place that somebody else was able to select them from. So that was an allegation because it was there. Yeah. Special prosecutor Liliana Herrera acknowledged that at least 8 missing or dead girls were ECHO students or had some connections to the school. And a lot of these, Echo had 2 schools in downtown Juarez, another one in downtown Chihuahua City. Teenagers with profiles similar to the Juarez victims who were connected to it. Yeah. So that's kind of a brutal element of the story. They had 2 kinds of people at the Echo School. They had students who enrolled in the classes and promotores, or promoters, who recruited students and other potential recruiters. I noticed that they focused intensely on my daughter, said one woman who was starting to believe whatever they told her. They promised everything, including a lot of money and the potential for travel. It was too good to be true, and I started to get suspicious. Echo managers then scheduled a talk for the prospective recruiters at a Juarez hotel. They treated the prospects to a meal and conducted several interviews. In those days, they were sending men and women recruiters to some of the most remote neighborhoods of Juarez. They knocked on doors and invited people to join Echo. They kept or took our original identification documents, so they were collecting their IDs and stuff. Yeah, creepy. Well, in his research, one New Mexico journalist, Kent Patterson, learned that several young women disappeared had a connection to a computer school or internet cafe. At least 16 young women with some sort of contact with Echo and other private computer schools in Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua City, and Nuevo Laredo have been murdered or disappeared. Many have been raped. Considering Mexico's explosive growth in internet use in recent years, computers can become lethal tools for those who target young women for abduction, rape, and murder. So there's something there, yeah, crazy. Juarez City enforcement officials estimate as many as 500 gangs operated in the city. So there's this huge gang element there. I mean, I can go. It just the stories in the vernacular of what's going on in Juarez were off the charts. Tons of drug dealing. It became kind of a centerpiece for the Colombian cartels and the transport north. And so these women became part of the illegal kind of there was a parallel economy. There was a standard economy, and then there was the cartel economy there. And in that economy, these girls became binding things and you know, victims in this cartel where there was the murders were part of this kind of bonding thing, and that's really was. And so all, in my opinion, and I think it's the opinion of Diana Valdez, is that these were part of this cartel thing. So all of those murders, or most of the murders, and maybe there were copycats, but a lot of those murders were done by people who were never going to be punished, people with impunity who, you know, paid off everybody. So the whole economy was a cartel kind of economy, which is really scary. And these poor girls who worked at Maquiladoras and were vulnerable, going to and leaving work, were picked up. And that's really I think the core story and really what happened or is happening. And I have to go back and see what the more recent cases is. But like I said, Diana Valdez says it's a 2000. She just redid her book or re-edited her book. So, and I haven't seen The Last Narc. I don't know what that's about, but this story has been brought up in other films. So there's one, Narcos Mexican Scene. I think it's, let's see if I can bring this up. Narcos 3. Season 3 has this Juarez killings based on a true story. This is an article from, I think it was one of the Hollywood Hollywood industry sites. So Narcos, this is from last year, 21, so not that long ago, a couple months ago. So this kind of theme or story was in that. There was another one. Let's see. Virgin of Juarez with Minnie Driver. And then I think there was one with, what is it? No, it was with Jennifer Lopez. It's called Border Town. There it is here. So you can this is featured in these ones. Martin Sheen and Jennifer Lopez. And there's an article too. I'll put this up. This was from, I think, Max Blumenthal, just from Salon, that covered this story back, I think, in 2002. Title of that is Day of the Dead, and their number there is 325 women. And I mean, and you can go into, this other, let's see, the red note. This is the woman who kind of did the same thing that was happening in Cancun, like pedophilia, child pornography, really gnarly stuff. Let me see if I can find that. Let's see if I can find this. And this is her book. This is translated from Spanish. The Demons of Eden, The Power That Protects Child Pornography. In 2005, Lydia Cacho shook public opinion with the appearance of the Devils of Eden, a detailed investigation into the corruption network that protected the sexual abuse of minors in Cancun by famous businessmen and public officials. In 2005, Lydia Cacho submitted to public opinion the famous case of Jean Sukar Khoury, a hotelier of Lebanese origin, an American resident who committed sexual abuse of minors in Cancun, and was protected by both local authorities and high-ranking politicians who even participated in the crime of corruption of minors. And then this was like a huge story in Mexico. Let's see. Anyway, there's a lot there. Like I said, I'll put all the stories. I'm at about 45 minutes. I got about 15 minutes left. If anybody want to ask any questions or anything. No, that was all Amber female victims. These were kind of always the women were the target, but there were men victims, not to this same crime. Like all of these murders happened in the context of other murders that took place at that time in Juarez. So there's all kinds of cartel killings of men and fights, but these ones, this specific, distinct pattern of women being murdered since 1993 or 92 is like a subset of the larger kind of cartel legal breakdown type of cases that happened around there involving the drug trade. And I think Valdez said in one one of the sequences of her books, what happened was, and this is kind of the end of her book, she says she got information that at some point a former president of Mexico sat down with political leaders in Chihuahua and said, Chihuahua has been sold to the cartel, to the Colombian cartel, not the Mexican, and we will, we're going to ship their drugs through here. And that when that money got spread around, and that influence and that kind of impunity. And there was a huge, a name that pops up often is the Carrillo cartel. There's two brothers, Amado Carrillo and something else. So it's like Sicario or, Narcos or something in real life, like a really much more graphic. And I think Carrillo, like something strange happened where he made billions of dollars. He was wanted, and then he went to Mexico City to get plastic surgery and supposedly died during that surgery. And then his doctors who were working on him, they were found in like 50-gallon drums, like they were murdered too. So it's just a bunch of death, and this is part of that. These killings are just a part of that kind of situation. There was something from Condoleezza Rice. I think you could see that in that the Border Echoes documentary. So she knows about it. There was some celebrities who showed up there. I think it was Jane Fonda. Some known cultural figures knew about this whole story. So I don't know if it got as much press as it should have. But, I just vaguely remembered it. But I do think it's an important story. And maybe things like that happen, maybe not on such a vast scale as what's happening in Juarez, but similar events could, be happening here, in a smaller degree. I've always thought like some of the smiley face killers involved are selected and people fly in. Like if you look at Joey LaBute, who I taught was one of the first people I studied on the smiley face killers, was took place in Columbus, Ohio, over the Arnold Schwarzenegger bodybuilding, convention. So maybe somebody flew in and they did the crime and left. So, yeah, computer op recruiting villagers. Yeah, something like that, like a front. There was rumors about the rich people in Juarez, their children, they called them the nephews or something like that, and that they were some of the people involved in it, and they would go on drug binges and then go abduct children. There would be intermediaries where the kids, the young women would be abducted. Narcos with badges, DFS. Yeah, it's super corrupt. I mean, that whole area is really corrupt right now, and still is. And I think that there were similar cases in Tijuana as well. So the Juarez was kind of like an epicenter of where there were the most cases, but Tijuana, Chihuahua City, Mexico City, so abductions. And I mean, even she says, and Valdez says, they're kept for a time. That's kind of another of the similarities of the smiley face killers, where they clearly are kept for somewhere for some time. And so, these are just horrific crimes. Let's see, what else do I got? This is kind of my first kind of research drop. So I definitely learned something putting this together, but I think that I can get a lot of information out. So Lydia Cacho's blog, she has a blog too. Let me see if I can pull that up. Yeah, her story, that's just a whole nother story. Since December 2005, due to the death threats and the criminal accusation for defamation and slander against me, filed by human traffickers and orchestrated by public judiciary under orders of the then Governor Mario Marin and his campaign financer Kamel Nassif Borge, I was forced to prove the crimes and build with personal resources in my own defense and that of the victims between the ages of 2 and 4. Together with Jose Luis Santiago Vasconcelos, then prosecutor of the Organized Crime Division Office, we demonstrated that my book effectively documents a formal network of organized crime, money laundering, child pornography, and child trafficking. Then it went to California court, held that Sukar Khoury admitted 7 reporters of child pornography, raping girls between the ages of 4 and 13, considered sufficient legal evidence to arrest and extradite him to be tried for those crimes in Mexico. This happened during the entire 6-year term of Felipe Calderon. Under death threats and evading people financed by that network to discredit myself, I fought a legal battle for 6 more years. 4 lawyers sold out. I took the case to the Supreme Court. I lived 5 years with escorts and attempts on my life. So I mean, these things happen. Let's see. But I remember her book, Lydia Cacho's book. So she's the one, again, who is involved in the Red Note. So I'll put that up. Red Note, Forgotten the Women of Juarez, the 2 books I will put up as well. But I think that's it. I mean, that's kind of an overview. I think you can get into more details. I had a lot more specifics from Valdez's book, which are interesting. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, ask them now. But all the links, I think you can really kind of do a deeper dive and kind of get more of the story. But I think I'm going to do another one like this on some public figures that I've been researching too, and not really even have guessed as much as just kind of going through some of the material and giving people kind of maybe a broader, myself included, broader, more nuanced, multifaceted view of some of these, I think, stories that may not get the same attention. Like, I think this is an important story. I do. And I think it's really kind of the future. Human migration, human trafficking. There's a lot of bad things happening at the border right now too. So anyway, that was kind of my first kind of adventure into doing just a research piece on my own. But thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, ask them now. Before, like I said, all the stuff I will put in here, I will put in the notes and the books. and maybe you can follow up on your own. But like I said, the difference between this book, The Killing Fields, and Daughters of Juarez, Valdez was there on point, but I think there is some. This girl Teresa Rodriguez has her own. Yeah, I think she does more work on Sharif than Valdez, and there's just a different approach. But all the stories are there, kind of the different body findings, the corruption, the blaming of the wrong suspects, the obvious bungling of the crime scenes, and it's almost like it's too intentional. So anyway, you guys have a good day. Thanks for listening. William Ramsey Investigates. Bye-bye.